Taking charge of your future starts with taking the first steps. And saving up to $30 a month on Cox Internet with the Affordable Connectivity Program makes those steps easy to take. Whether they bring you to click upload on your first short film or join now for an online book club. Applying is easy. See if you qualify at cox.com/ACP. Non-transferable one per household application and eligibility decisions are made by the FCC.
From hook and bullet to policy and science, we're here to discuss and dissect all matters of importance to Montana's rugged landscape and the people and wildlife that call it home. This is Montana Untamed. On October 13th, news broke that the owner of Holland Lake Lodge has decided to cancel his controversial expansion and upgrade plans at the resort. He's ending his partnership with a large Utah-based resort company called POWDR and is trying to sell the lodge. It's huge news in Montana. As for the past year, there's been quite a bit of an uproar as people protested the plan. You can't drive anywhere in western Montana without seeing billboards for, quote, Save Holland Lake, a group that's been criticizing the expansion plans. The whole saga involved threats of lawsuits and lots of heated public meetings. Exactly a year ago, Dave Erickson of the Missoulian newspaper joined me as the news broke on the expansion proposal. And he's here with me today. Dave, let's go back and review the timeline events over the last year. And can you provide some context for folks who may not know why this is such a big deal?
Yeah, good to be with you, Tom. Yeah, it has been 1 year. There's been a lot of news about Holland Lake Lodge over the past year. It's been a closely watched topic in western Montana. So, a year ago, Christian Wolfile, the owner, announced that he was partnering with a Utah-based resort company called POWDR, POWDR in all caps, that he was going to demolish about 10 aging structures on the site and build 32 new buildings on the site at Holland Lake in the Swan Valley. The lodge is about 99 years old, and the main lodge burned down in 1946 and was rebuilt that year. And Christian started working there in 1999 and kind of took over as owner in 2004. And so he had proposed, he leases the land. It's Forest Service land, it's public land on the shore of Holland Lake. And he operates his lodge. He owns the buildings and operates his lodge with a special use permit that's issued by the Flathead National Forest. So he has about 6 little lakefront cabins in the main lodge and a restaurant and a full liquor license there, and hosts a lot of weddings and corporate retreats and kind of is at capacity all year long. He doesn't really operate in the winter. But he had proposed to kind of partner with POWDR and build a new 28-room lodge and 26 new cabins right on the lake or near the lake. And the proposed expansion would have increased the permit acreage from about 10 acres to 15 acres. And that was last September.
So, that special use permit through the Flathead National Forest will come up later as kind of the main paradigm for this whole conversation going on. But basically, it would be a dramatic increase in infrastructure and accommodations there on the lake. So, as you said, it was, September of 2022. What happened when, he came public with this announcement for his plans?
Yeah, so one of the first bits of news came out that the Forest Service has to approve any expansion plan, and Flathead National Forest has 3 options when considering anybody proposing an expansion under one of those special use permits. And so the 3 categories of review in order from least intensive to most intensive are categorical exclusion, and then environmental assessment, and then environmental impact statement. And so the Forest Service's first announcement said that their intent was to take public comment, but they were intending to allow the expansion to go through a categorical exclusion, which is the least intensive environmental analysis that they could have gone through. And so, that when Forest Service took public comment, there was quite a bit of interest, you could say, in the issue. The meetings were packed, the public meetings were packed up there in the Swan Valley, and about 6,000 online comments poured in, and most people were opposed to it, and there was a lot of criticism of the way the Forest Service came to that conclusion of their intent to use a categorical exclusion, although they never, actually made the decision that they were going to use that. It was just announced that that was their intent, but they were going to take public comment. But yeah, there was an uproar, to say the least, and a lot of people were opposed to, it's a rustic lodge, it's a pretty pristine lake, it's right next to the wilderness, Bob Marshall Wilderness, and a lot of people were opposed to the expansion plans.
Right. I mean, to the point where there was kind of an interest group, an anti-Holland Lake expansion interest group formed, correct? Yeah,
there's a group called Save Holland Lake that kind of formed. It started social media sites at first, and then, it grew to, stickers and then billboards. And, a lot of people joined the Facebook group, and, seemed like it was just kind of took on a huge surge of momentum, and just a lot of people opposing it. There was a few public commenters when you look through the Forest Service records of people that supported the expansion plans, but the vast majority of them were opposed.
Okay, so I think that sets the groundwork well for what we covered in our first episode on the topic a year ago. Let's catch up. All these twists and turns through the Forest Service reviewing the application. Can you flesh that out for us?
Yeah, so my fellow reporter Josh Murdoch isn't able to be here on the podcast with us today, but he did most of the reporting between the time I wrote that story and now. So anyone out there listening should go Google Joshua Murdoch, Holland Lake Missoulian, or Holland Lake Helena Independent Record, and look at his stories. But essentially, the first thing that happened was Kurt Steele, who was then the supervisor of the Flathead National Forest,
right,
admitted at a public meeting that he originally thought that the lodge was already at 15 acres when they applied for the expansion. And he was under the impression it was already at 15 acres, so it wouldn't be an expansion. And then he realized later that lodge is currently at only 10.5 acres. So that wasn't taken into account by the Forest Service. He admitted that when they announced their intent to use a categorical exclusion. And then he announced that they were looking into the next more rigorous step, which is an environmental assessment rather than a categorical exclusion. And then my colleague Josh Murdoch also reported in May that, Save Holland Lake, the group, they had gotten attorneys involved, and the attorneys had drafted a memo and sent to the Flathead National Forest that they believed that Christian Wolfile, the owner, had violated the special use permit by having two executives at POWDR, kind of join him as co-owners of the lodge, and one of them had actually taken ownership of the liquor license there, and so the attorneys believed that Christian Wolfile had therefore violated a special use permit because POWDR wasn't listed. The executives at POWDR weren't listed on the special use permit as permit holders, so by having them join as owners of the lodge, he was violating that special use permit.
Wow, okay. This even got the attention of our elected lawmakers, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had state lawmakers having their say on the issue. We had Montana's governor having his say, essentially, telling the Forest Service that they needed to really consider public input, because obviously a lot of these politicians are hearing from the public. A lot of people are criticizing the plan, and a lot of people didn't believe there was adequate public input. You even had Senator John Tester, kind of grilling the U.S. Forest Service chief in Washington, D.C., and saying that the categorical exclusion is a process that's used for like wildfire mitigation. Somebody wants to thin some trees on their property, or tear down an old shed. That's kind of the purpose. Tester's point was that's kind of the purpose of the categorical exclusion. So he was criticizing the Forest Service's decision to go through that process, and he kind of called it a loophole. And so when it gets to that point, a lodge expansion in western Montana, getting to that point of a U.S. senator asking the Forest Service chief about it, and kind of shows you just how big of a deal this got to be in western Montana.
Right, I'm sure that questioning probably landed on C-SPAN somewhere.
Yeah, had to have, yeah.
Okay, so then what happened last week, which would have been, October 13th?
Yeah, so it's, about a year and a couple weeks after he first announced, he just called me up, or he actually emailed me and just said, I got some big news to let you know. And he met me at a coffee shop, Christian Wolfheil, and told me that he's called the whole thing off. He said he's ending his partnership with POWDR, and getting them to transfer back the liquor license to him. And he's just going to withdraw all his applications to the Forest Service and put the lodge up for sale and get out of the business of owning Holland Lake Lodge.
What was his demeanor in the conversation?
Yeah,
what did he say his reasoning was?
Yeah, he said, his reasoning is he claims that there had been threats against him, and he didn't feel safe. He said just the tone of some of the comments that people had directed to him over the past year on social media and in conversations and in phone calls. He said they felt kind of threatening, and he had some screenshots of some things that could be interpreted as death threats, and he specifically used the word death threats in his claim of what people had said, although he said a lot of the comments have since been deleted, and he doesn't have screenshots of them. Mm-hmm. But he said he's just tired of the backlash he's received, and he feels that the time for him is just to let somebody else take on ownership.
So yeah, just to be clear, not only is this proposed expansion with POWDR dead in the water, but he's actually selling his stake in the whole lodge operation, correct?
Yep, he's going to try and sell the buildings that he owns, that could mean any kind of out-of-state owner could take a bid at buying this.
Right.
That's what's interesting is, POWDR hasn't issued any kind of statement indicating.
Yeah, I was going to ask, were you able to get anybody from POWDR on the phone?
No, I was not. And, from what he said, they've completely backed away, but it's yet to be seen if they will they put in an offer to buy the lodge. It's yet to be seen. I mean, he said he's taking all offers, so that would indicate that they don't have an offer on the table that he's strongly considering.
Right.
So it appears that he's just going to listen to all offers at this point, and but that could mean anything. That could mean a local buyer, or that could mean an out-of-state buyer, which is interesting.
Right. No idea on what the list price is, huh?
No, he didn't disclose that. He just said people need to contact him to talk about it.
Okay. So do we have any idea what might be next for Holland Lake Lodge? You've kind of alluded to it, but maybe we can summarize.
Yeah, I mean, the Flathead National Forest has to basically work with any purchaser to apply for and to be granted the special use permit to operate the lodge. Otherwise, it can't operate. So anybody that's purchasing that lodge has to apply for the special use permit and be granted it and work within the confines and the rules of the Flathead National Forest.
Because the permit is tied to the applicant, not to the owner. So this new owner would have to go through a whole new permitting process, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yep. So Christian Wolfheil can't just sell the
permit.
Sell the permit to somebody.
Right.
No, they have to abide by. They have to apply for and get their own special permission to use those buildings on that public land.
So, and I'm curious, I'd like to go back to where the process, the the process that the Forest Service was going through to evaluate this increased permit or this increased use, did that never made it to the end, right? They never made a decision on whether this would be feasible or not, correct?
No, they did not. They had kind of,
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not an expert in these things, but they were still in the middle of what they call their scoping, public scoping, to gather information. And the whole process was delayed because Kurt Steele, as you know, took a job in Missoula in the middle of all this.
Right.
And so, and then they had kind of decided to extend the public comment period. And yeah, just no decisions had been made. And it appeared that the whole process was still, because there had been threats of lawsuits. Those attorneys I alluded to earlier threatened a lawsuit. And so I think the Flathead Forest was still in the process of reviewing the original application and determining what kind of different information Mr. Wolfile and Powder had to submit.
Right. So I guess my question, it remains to be seen that if a new owner or even Powder comes in and buys this, we still don't know if the idea of an expansion of that magnitude, regardless of the owner or applicant, is even going to fly with the Forest Service. Yeah.
There's just no way of knowing if an application of that magnitude would have been approved. There's no way of knowing. It wasn't even close to being approved. It wasn't even close to being under an environmental review to even determine whether it would get approved. So yeah,
right.
There's just no way of knowing how far that application would have gone, because it was just still in the early stages of basically the Flathead National Forest taking public input on it, and they still hadn't made any kind of decisions.
Right. And have we heard from the National Forest at all since this announcement last Friday?
Yeah, they just sent a brief statement saying they were aware of Mr. Wolfile's decision, and they're going to work with him until he's not the owner anymore. So it was a short statement, but that's really all they can say at this point.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
No, it was just quite the saga. A lot of people were tuned into it in western Montana. Every news organization in the state, I think, covered it at some point. You drive around Missoula, you see the Save Holland billboards. There's Save Holland Lake t-shirts. There's stickers on cars everywhere in western Montana. And it was it was a big deal for a year, and it looks like we're heading into the next chapter. So.
Yeah, an unceremonious end, or like you said, maybe just the start of a new chapter.
Yeah, exactly. Yet to be determined. So I'd suggest people still keep an eye out at Missoulian.com or HelenIR.com to see updates.
Well, yeah, I guess if you're out there looking to buy a lodge in western Montana, there's going to be one for sale. It does have strings attached, though.
Yep, and certainly when he puts an actual listing up, like if it goes to the multiple listing service and he has a list price on there, I'll be reporting on that. So
right. But it could just be all private.
Yeah, I mean, Montana state law doesn't require anybody to disclose a sales price of real estate. So if he finds a buyer and sells it,
we may never know.
We'll never know what he sold it for. We'll know that who the new owner is, unless they use a mysterious LLC, which you can do in Montana. But property records only tell you so much. But it's possible that he sells it. And we could never know how much he sells it for, but we'll at least have some kind of indication that the ownership has changed hands at some point. So I'm sure we'll report on that.
Right. All right, Dave. Well, hey, thanks for coming on, man. Look forward to the next time.
Thank you, Tom.
Montana Untamed is a podcast from the newsrooms of Lee Enterprises Montana newspapers. Visit any of our websites or subscribe wherever podcasts are found.
At Southern Company, we know the right solutions start with the right questions. How do we deliver reliable energy and overcome unpredictable challenges? How do we get to net zero carbon emissions and ensure communities thrive? How do we deliver affordable energy today and tomorrow? Southern Company, building the future of energy.